We are celebrating the 55th year of the Commission Composer Project at UW River Falls. This year, we are honored to commission composer Evan Williams to write a piece for the UWRF student body. UWRF Professor Emeritus Conrad de Jong began the commission. De Jong, pardon me, I can't speak today. Began the Commission Composer Project in 1967. His intention was to ensure that contemporary trends in American music would become part of the repertoire of the students at UWRF. Throughout the project's history, Pulitzer Prize, Guggenheim, and MacArthur Genius Award winners have been commissioned and brought to campus to work with the entire student body. It is the longest standing program of its kind in the United States and places a national spotlight on the UW River Falls Music Department. This year, we are fortunate to welcome composer Evan Williams, who is assistant professor of music at Rhodes College. Williams' music has been performed across the country and internationally by members of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, the International Contemporary Ensemble, Fifth House Ensemble, and at festivals such as the New Music Gathering, the Electroacoustic Barn Dance, and the New York City Electronic Music Festival. He has been commissioned by notable performers and ensembles, including the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra and Urban Playground Chamber Orchestra, and has received numerous awards and honors, including serving as the Detroit Symphony Orchestra's Classical Roots Composer in Residence in 2018. William holds a DMA in composition from the College Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati. He also holds a Master's of Music in Composition from Bowling Green State University and a Bachelor's in Music Theory and Composition from Lawrence University. Before joining the faculty at Rhodes, he held teaching positions at Lawrence University, Bennington College, and at the Walden School's Young Musicians Program. Thank you so much, Evan, and welcome. We're really excited to have you here and to premiere the piece. It's really awesome. I played on it, so I'm really excited.
On the percussion.
Awesome, great work, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
So thank you so much, and Evan, I wanted to mention too, Conrad DeYoung is on as well, so we'll get a chance.
Oh, awesome! Thank you so much for this legacy that you've created.
So, well, Evan, do you want to first take a listen to the piece and we play that for me?
I'm happy to do a quick introduction for it as well. Perhaps today is a fitting day to premiere this piece, as we have a verdict in the case of the murder of George Floyd. So this summer, of course, it was a hard summer for all of us because of COVID, but particularly hard because of the number of deaths of unarmed brown and black people by police officers. Early on, of course, we had Ahmaud Arbery. He was not killed by an on-duty police officer, but retired police officers. George Floyd, of course, and Breonna Taylor. But while these events are always sad and heartbreaking, this year felt a little different. Each of these events seem to have a greater sort of outpouring of support from around the world, and these massive protests that took place to demand justice for these murders were really touching to me. It's something that we haven't seen in a long time, and so I thank you, UWRF, for allowing me to write this piece and to take on the subject matter. I know it's not easy, and of course, I recognize the difficulties and the hardship and the danger of policing in America. I know it's not an easy job, and I understand that we have to protect the people that to do this job, but I don't feel that the lives of black and brown people are worth the sacrifice that we have basically had to deal with over, it's of course over more than the last few decades, if not since the first slaves were brought here to the U.S. So thank you again, and for allowing me to write this piece and allowing me to express myself in this manner. And yeah, without further ado, we'd love to hear the piece. Wonderful performance. I want to thank all the students and Professor Cudd for all the hard work they put into that, preparing that piece. It's not an easy piece. So I thank you so much for all that hard work.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. It was a wonderful piece, and I know everybody loved, all of the ensemble members loved working on it. So it was very powerful.
So perhaps should I talk to you a little bit more about the musical story of this piece and how it came about?
Yes, please.
So I actually first had the idea to write this piece back in 2014. And originally I conceived it as a percussion ensemble piece. So it was just going to be all percussion using hand crank sirens and things like that. I was inspired after hearing John Luther Adams' Inuksawit. He came to our festival at Bowling Green State University in 2012. And it was the first time I had saw hand crank sirens. I had saw the back when I was a student in my undergrad at Lawrence University. I had saw we played a piece and I forgot the composer's name with a big siren. It was on a stand and it was huge and it was very loud. And I didn't think that something like that was something I wanted in a piece. But when I saw these hand crank sirens that everyone was walking around with, I thought that was a really, really cool sound. The title is inspired by Handel's aria. It's a tenor aria, Sound and Alarm from Judas Maccabeus. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with that oratorio. Obviously, Messiah is the more famous of his oratorios, but Judas Maccabeus is a cool one too. And one of the arias for tenor is called Sound and Alarm, which I first heard when I was a student at an undergrad, and I thought that was a really cool title. I was going to use some melodies from that aria, but when I started writing it this summer, I just didn't feel like it fit. So I kept the title, but didn't use any of the Handel influence. So how did it become a percussion ensemble piece to a saxophone percussion octet? Well, around 2016, I kept hearing of a couple of pieces by folks like Tristan Parrish and oh wow, I'm forgetting names today, I feel so bad that I can't remember her name. It'll probably come to me later, and I'll shout it out. They were pieces for string quartet and percussion ensemble. And I thought that's a really interesting ensemble pairing. And you can, you get the best of both, percussive instruments and melodic instruments. But I was thinking, well, if I were to write something for percussion quartet, I want to make some really loud music. And if you do that, it's going to be hard for the string quartet to play over that. Maybe if they're, amplified or something. But I was like, you know what? And saxophone is one of my favorite instruments. Even though I'm a trombonist by training, saxophones and percussion have always been great friends and allies of mine musically. And I said, well, you know what? Saxophones could do it. Saxophones can play really loud, and they can play just as loud as percussion. So from then on, I wanted to write a percussion and on a saxophone octet. And I approached a couple of people about it, but it just didn't work out for the commission. In fact, someone asked, well, if you write this piece, can you make it for undergrads for it to be performed by undergrads? And I thought that was a good idea because, of course, every music school and conservatory has a sax studio and has a percussion studio, so it's something that could be easily played all across the country. And so when Professor Cudd first reached out to me asking about a piece, and she mentioned that she's the percussion professor, I was like, oh, here it is. Here's my chance to write this piece. And so yeah, I started writing it this summer. A big influence of the piece, if you know this work by Louis Andriessen, Workers Union. Anyone familiar with that piece? Workers Union by Louis Andriessen. It's a really cool piece. If you don't know it, check it out. Yes. And the whole piece is basically, we call it aleatoric. So Andriessen gives the rhythms that everyone should play. Everyone has unison rhythms, but he gives none of the pitches. Everyone chooses their own pitch. He does tell you if he wants a low pitch or a high pitch, if things should rise or fall melodically, but all of the pitches are indeterminate. So I thought that was a really interesting way to approach this piece, both philosophically and just practically. On the philosophical level, it's, the piece is about coming together for collective action, but everyone being able to maintain their individual identity, which I think is really important. But also just practically, it's something that the saxophones wouldn't have to worry about learning these hard, melodic passages. And perhaps if any of the saxophonists are here today, they can tell me if it was harder or easier to, improvise the notes rather than having to play these passages. So there's several sections where the saxophones choose their own notes, but the percussion always play the same instruments. And then there are sections of that I call senza misura, where the saxophones play these siren-like gestures, and then they are joined by the actual siren. But then there are several moments, of course, that are fully written out. The major melodic material of the piece comes from the hymn "We Shall Overcome," and you probably noticed that toward the end. You probably don't, recognize it early on, as it's hidden throughout the piece, and then when it's first introduced, it's introduced as a variation in minor, and so it's sort of very sorrowful and whatnot. But then at the end, it comes back triumphantly. So that's basically musically how the piece works. I'm sure I know on Monday there were some questions about the piece, so I assume we can devote the rest of the time to a question and answer session about the work. And I'm also happy to show you the score and excerpts of the score if you like as well.
Anyone have any?
I have a question, I guess about like how you kind of chose what like saxophone extended techniques to use. They were so well written in there.
Oh, thanks.
How you chose which ones where.
Yeah, so I mean, they're basically just my favorite techniques. I love the pitch bends, and of course, that sound always reminded me of sirens, especially when multiple saxes are doing it together. So that's the first, one of the first major extended techniques you hear. And then multiphonics is another favorite of mine. And basically, the way I wrote them, I used to be very particular about my multiphonics. I used to break out the Kinsey multiphonic book and find the exact one I want. But every time I did that, the saxophones that I gave the piece to, they're like, "Oh yeah, that one doesn't work on my instrument," or "That one has a different that one has a different fingering on my instrument," stuff like that. So I just got tired of like the unreliability of these multiphonics. So I just say, you choose your own. So how about that's probably a good section for me to show you the score for this. And so they're interspersed through here. So right here. So I just say, I need you to play at least an F sharp on, in this range, but whatever other note you play or notes that you play are up to you. Just find one that you can play loud and play accented, because some multiphonics only come out soft and airy, and some only come out harsh and and loud. And so in this section, I want you to find a multiphonic that's harsh and loud that works for you. And so that's how I approach multiphonics since around 2016. Next question.
Sorry, Evan, we're a quiet group today.
It's only Wednesday. It's already a long week. I understand. And I'm sure your semester is near the end like mine is. So I know there's some in the chat too. Perhaps I can read some of the chat questions. So Patrick Dininger wrote, "Very moved, thank you. The beginning felt like the cacophony of the urban world, as you said, the rhythms that we all have, and somehow it all works. But then we have the sound, the alarm, when we see, feel injustices. Those quieter sections were very moving." Yeah, thanks. I didn't specifically think of like cityscapes or anything like that with the beginning, though I could definitely understand that. Basically, the inspiration was just workers' union. That's a piece that means a lot to me. I actually organized a performance of it a couple years ago at Lawrence, and I just the power of that piece just means a lot to me. Again, sort of just like everyone coming together for a common purpose, even if you don't support labor movements or whatever, just coming together for a common purpose, but retaining your own individuality by getting to play whatever notes you have, you want, I think is a very powerful thing to me. So that's why I basically just stole from good old Louis. Mhm.
Another question. I guess, like what inspired at the end you have like the siren player Josiah here like to walk off the stage.
Mhm. Basically, I just wanted it to sound like the siren is retreating, like the police car is just going past you, and basically that it's something that lingers on, and it's still going even though it's it's gone past you already. So that could be both philosophical or just practical. It's just like, well, a car going past, get it, or just something that's just like, even though this situation has resolved itself, that doesn't mean it's not going on elsewhere. So I'm not sure how the percussionists handled it, but basically what I was looking for is just like, they're just going to keep cranking the siren until they like walk outside and maybe down the block. But basically the piece is over when the people in the hall no longer hear the siren. So yeah, that was the thought behind that last gesture.
Evan, how did you come about with the percussion notation? I know that there was sort of a Facebook discussion.
Yes. Well, and actually, so that was about the saxophone notation.
Oh.
So originally this had all X note heads, but people felt that that had a very specific meaning, and I agreed, especially because later on I use X note heads to do something else, and so it didn't really make sense that all these had X's. And I actually do this a lot. I go to the public square of the new music community on Facebook and say, especially performers, and say, what would you think if you saw this? What does this say to you? And I really got a lot of good feedback from it. And so eventually I decided on this notation, which basically just has no note heads. And I'm curious to hear from the saxophonists if they felt that worked out, because basically it gives you an approximate range of what you should play, but you have you don't have to actually play like G here or C here or whatever. You get to choose whatever note in that area that you want to play. And of course, you can see here, I basically limit the number of pitches at first. And then each time it comes back, they get more, and then eventually they can play all 12 pitch classes. So any saxophonist that played the piece, what did you think of this? Was it, did you find it easier or harder to perform it like versus just regular notes on the page?
I think it was definitely something to get used to.
Mhm.
Like committing to the rhythm more than specific notes. I know at first like we kind of like each of us kind of mapped out around where we'd start, so we didn't like double up too much.
Mhm.
Yeah, when we first did this, when we were first practicing, I should say, we were all kind of playing the same notes at the same time. So we all did the same.
Mhm.
And then after that, we were like, well, it should be different. So when we all kind of got half steps off after that,
Okay.
it was just getting used to not not playing the same notes at the same time.
And I should say, if it happens that you all were playing the same notes, I actually wouldn't mind. I mean, what you did was great. You did a really great job. But if it happened that you were all sort of playing the same notes a lot of the time, I think that's okay, especially because you're all in different transpositions anyway. And so I don't think that's something that I would want to avoid personally.
Another thing about the piece that was cool on the saxophone front of it with the notation, it was, like you said, looking at the various pitches we could use and kind of focusing on those and pushing those to the back to focus more on the rhythm as well. And just kind of go on autopilot with what your fingers do as long as you just keep in mind.
Yeah. And yeah, for me, like, especially like when I'm also the orchestra director here at Rhodes, sometimes I say, okay, forget all the notes, just play the rhythm, because rhythm is, for me, is most important. Like if we're not playing the same rhythm, then it doesn't matter if you're not playing the same notes, because you're playing the wrong notes if you're not in rhythm with everyone else. And so I just say like, okay, let's do Johnny one note, everyone play a B flat, or now play whatever note you want and play in rhythm. So then I can hear closely who's playing the wrong rhythm. And so something like that is, I think, not only a great learning tool, but I can transfer into some interesting musical material.
Saxophones, was that the first time you had run across any notation like that? I think for percussion, it's really common that we
And what's funny is that I don't. I give it to the mallet percussion, but the drums and the metallic percussion have to play exactly the drums that I asked for. So.
Yeah, that was a tricky tom part, especially.
We don't usually see a notation like that. So it's nice to see something that was kind of like brand new. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I was pretty awesome with it.
There's a saxophone composer, Ryunoda, who does more contemporary works for the saxophone. And he uses notation similar, but like his is a little bit more interesting to decipher. So like it was a cool combination of something familiar and something new.
And what's the composer's name again?
Ryunoda.
Okay.
Evan, I don't know if there's some new questions up here.
Oh, in the chat?
Yeah, in the chat.
I can't see the chat while I'm sharing, so
okay.
That's okay. I'm bringing it up now. So Faye Perkins says, the quieter sections with the saxes seem to be a time for reflection and meditation, trying to figure out what's going on, then sharply interrupted by the sirens and go back to confusion. Seems to reflect how we go through challenging times in history. And then they also say, loved how We Shall Overcome was woven throughout the piece, but really became apparent at the end, ending on a note of hopefulness. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't originally see it, the saxophone pitch bends as a reflection, but definitely if that's what the listener feels, and that's completely valid. That's a completely perfectly fine way to hear that section. I just wanted the sound of sirens. I just wanted them to sound like sirens. So. And then Reverend Harkey writes, is there a siren in the music room that could be shown? Not familiar with them. No worries if not possible. Beautiful work. Yeah, do we have a siren in the music room that they can see?
I think
yours were cool. They were like red and black. I like it.
I think they're downstairs in my office.
Okay. Let me see if I can find one on the internets.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a regular, just a handheld one that we were able to pick up.
There we go. That's what. This is the first kind of one I came across. This big old $300 one that's on the stand. and they get really loud. But these are the hand crank ones.
Yeah.
Mhm. And so what's cool about it is the faster you crank it, the louder it gets. And so you can create this really nice decrescendo, crescendo, decrescendo gestures, which the percussionists did really well. And they're cheap. You know, you can buy them for like $30. One thing, when I first asked if I could use these in the piece, you know, if Patti said that they didn't have them, I would have just shipped her a couple, you know, and then just, you know, ship them out to whoever does the piece. But they're quite inexpensive for how cool of a sound they make.
Evan, how did you come up with, well, I'm thinking especially Josiah was the one that was playing break drum and some of the medals. How did you come up with those ideas, that particular instrumentation for?
Yeah, a couple of pieces use a similar pitch, you know, pitched piped slash metallic percussion setup. The first one coming to mind is David Lang's. Oh, my brain is not working today. What's that?
Anvil Chorus?
Not Anvil Chorus. The Quartet.
Oh,
You know what I'm talking about?
I can't think. Yeah,
Oh my God, my brain. David Lang, percussion quartet. I think he wrote it for So Percussion. So-called Laws of Nature.
Oh,
Yeah, the so-called Laws of Nature. Love that piece. It's so cool. And everyone, it's cool. All four of them have the same notation, the same instrumentation, and those pitch pipes. They just sound really cool. And that I think is it the second movement or the first movement that has the pitch pipe. Check out the piece if you don't know it. It's really cool. And I just really loved that sound. So it's actually something that I use in a lot of pieces now since I've heard that piece back in 2011. It's actually a common percussion setup that I use. And when we did Workers Union at Lawrence, I actually asked the percussionists to have a similar setup. We had a couple percussionists. I asked for toms and metallic, and we went back and forth between those two setups. So together, I love them. And you might have noticed that I often pair the percussion with the saxophone. So every time you hear a multiphonic is paired with a break drum hit. And so every multiphonic that you hear has a break drum hit. And then later on, when it's not multiphonic, but it's still loud interjections by the saxophone, that's paired with a bass drum hit. And so I really like making these connections throughout the percussion and sax instruments, not making them separate entities, but united in their playing.
I have a question. So as a composer and just as a musician in general, are there any like musicians or composers or pieces that you find that have influenced you significantly or keep influencing you, or you just find that you keep just really drawing a lot of influence from?
Well, I specifically talked about Workers Union. I guess Workers Union isn't a piece that I keep drawing from, is really just for this piece. David Lang, in general, David Lang is a really big influence on my music. I think what he does is really cool in terms of groove, but also using time and space throughout his music. If you're not familiar with his work, I would suggest you check it out. He's sort of a master at patience. There's long, drawn out moments of silence that you're like, what's going on? And then bam, something loud happens. And I love stuff like that. Some of my other very influential composers on me include David Maslanka. Perhaps those of you who play in one ensemble are familiar with his music. John Adams is a very important composer to me. And of course, those who passed away, Mahler is my all-time favorite composer. And so oftentimes I either use melodies by him or are inspired by his orchestration and stuff like that. So those are sort of my top composers.
So when I listen to music, I'm constantly thinking of like, I make a lot of like mental imagery, and I'm always thinking about like extra musical association. So like when I hear the siren, I'm like, okay, and this is the siren, and this is the context, and like I have a very deliberate mental image in my head. I'm wondering, when you were writing this piece, did you have any of those kinds of moments throughout when you were writing? A passage, you were like, and this represents this exact sort of idea.
Mhm. It's really just the sirens. So I actually am very similar. Most of my music is either programmatic or inspired by something. I don't write a lot of what we call absolute music. I only have a few pieces that are like quartets or concerto. Most of them are inspired by some extra musical thing. So I'm actually very similar. And so just the big ideas of siren, of course, there are general sort of feelings and thoughts throughout the piece, but there's not like, this is when people protest or this is when, the violence happens. It's more just uh, feelings of anger, feelings of despair, of anguish, but also feelings of hope that maybe perhaps one day things will change. Otherwise, I leave all the rest of that to the listener to decide. So one thing is that yes, it ends on this great rendition of "We Shall Overcome," but the last chord is interrupted by C minor, and the piece ends on minor. So you know, I'll leave that to your own decision of what that means to you as a listener. That after this great moment of triumph, that it still ends on a note of sadness.
I actually have another question. So, as a person of color in the classical musical field, which is there's not a lot of people of color typically in the classical musical field. Uh, that has kind of affected me in a way. There isn't a lot of people like me, so I can feel, kind of lonely. And I'm wondering, how has that affected you personally?
Yeah, it's affected me a lot. And in fact, on Monday, I talked about a work that was exactly that I wrote exactly for that purpose. So as I wrote a couple of years ago, I wrote a harpsichord concerto called Dead White Man Music. And it was all about me grappling with this idea of, did I enter a field that is for and by, well-to-do Caucasian people, and in the canon, and basically, sorry to those students who were here on Monday are hearing a repeat of this, but when I was an undergrad studying music and getting my degree, in 5 years, never in a course did I study music by a woman or person of color. In 5 years of playing in ensembles, and I played in a lot of ensembles, I played a symphonic band, one ensemble, orchestra, chamber groups. I did play some in jazz band, and I also sang. I sang in the choruses and I sang in the opera. I played no pieces by people of color except for in jazz band, and I only played two pieces by women in all those ensembles. And so it made me start thinking, like, well, the where do I fit in? Where do folks that look like me fit in? And it even made me thought, should I still be doing this? Because at the time I was grappling with the fact if I wanted to stay in music or if I wanted to go to law school and study law instead. And so, that was a very personal piece where I really grappled with that issue. I shouldn't say, not at the time I was thinking about law school. Like a couple of years before that, I was thinking about law school. By the time I wrote Dead White Man Music, I had finished my doctorate, and that, after you get your doctorate in music, it's too late to do anything else. Not true, but I got a lot of loan debt, so I'm sticking with this for now.
Evan, would you want to play any of that for us? I know we have a
Sure. So we listened to the second movement on Monday. Let's maybe listen to the third movement. Maybe not all of it though, because it's like I think it's like 10 minutes. And we only got about exactly 10 minutes. So I'll play a couple sections of the third movement. Sorry, let me find the score really quick. Oh, I don't need to find the score. Let me find the video. There we go. And it should start right on the third movement. Yep. Can you hear it all right?
No.
Are you sharing sound on Zoom when you
No? Okay. I don't think I did. Yeah. I don't think I pressed that because I thought I was just sharing PDF. So let me do that. Okay. Let's make sure that we hear sound. We hear sound? Great. Excellent. All right. Let me go to the third movement. It's too far. Okay. There we go. This is the end of the second movement. I'm going to skip ahead a bit to the end, and then we could talk about this. So the end uses the folia variations. If you don't know about that, look it up. It's just a set of a chord progression that Baroque composers would improvise over. So I hope this is not too, you know. So yeah, that's the end of Dead White Man music. So yeah, I know that's not too much time left for questions, but I'm free now if anyone wants to stick behind for a couple more minutes to continue talking about that work or sound an alarm.
The top instrument in the score there, I couldn't quite see.
It's harpsichord, so it's a harpsichord concerto, and so I put the concerto instrument at the top of my score.
That's kind of like, I feel like the harpsichord is kind of like the most dead white man.
That's exactly what the conductor said of Urban Playground Chamber Orchestra, who commissioned it. It's like it's the most dead, most white instrument ever, but I love it. It's a cool instrument. But yes, that's part of the reason of choosing it, is that it's considered a a ancient instrument, a historical instrument. Of course, it's still being made and it's still in use, but mostly if you're going to play Baroque music, it's a very specific instrument for a very specific period. But I love it. It's a cool instrument. And this concerto, I feel it works well. It's not a piano concerto. It's not a organ concerto. It's a harpsichord concerto. It can only be played on harpsichord. So,
Evan, what was the response that you received?
Overwhelmingly positive. And I was really nervous about it. So it was first premiered in New York, and of course, New York is, it's liberal, it's progressive, it's hip, and so I didn't expect any pushback there. The second performance happened in Toledo, Ohio, and I was so nervous for it. I was like, people are going to be mad about this. In fact, before the performance started, this older gentleman behind me was looking at the program like, dead white man music, what's that all about? And I was like, oh crap, they're gonna think I'm like reverse racist or whatever. But after the piece ended and I got up to take a bow, he was like one of the first people to stand up and give a standing ovation. So I think people get it. They understand that I'm not trying to like buy the canon and try to say that it shouldn't exist and that we shouldn't perform Beethoven anymore, whatever. I love the canon, I love this music, but I have to balance that with the fact that basically I was taught a white only version of music history. And it's not that, there weren't that many women and Black people working in the field at the time. And yes, that's true, but there were some. And they made very important contributions to the repertoire. So, but I never learned about them. So, yeah, until I taught myself about them.
Any other questions for Mr. Williams?
I have a question. Hey, Evan, I'm Pat O'Keefe. Great piece and a great job to all the students and Patti Cudd. You guys did awesome putting that together. So just on this topic of composers of color, are there other composers you have discovered that you think our students should know about? And
Yeah.
who would you like to let them know
So
about?
a lot of the influences of like this piece, a huge influence of dead white man music was Julius Eastman. And he's a composer that I've loved. I've learned about in grad school and that I just loved. So like when we think about the post-minimalists, so the folks after Philip Glass and Steve Reich, we probably think about like John Adams, David Lang, Julia Wolf, and all those folks, and they're great composers. I love them. But really, Eastman is like the first. Eastman was the first to combine sort of minimalist ideas with atonal music, aleatory, and stuff like that. So he's been a huge influence on my own work. So Julius Eastman is one. Of course, you have the classics. You have folks like Joseph de Bouillon, the Chevalier de Saint George. You have Florence Price, of course, who's receiving a renaissance of her work recently. Margaret Bonds, William Grant Still, George Walker, and those living today. Jeffrey Mumford is someone who writes really interesting music. So many I can think of so many working today. But if you're looking for the classics, definitely those groups, and then folks like Julius Eastman, if you're interested in sort of the minimalist and New York downtown scene, and some of the composers that were a part of that. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Mhm,
Thank you.
mhm.
We, Patti and I were a few years ago, were involved in the big Julius Eastman festival. So
Wonderful. Yeah, it's so great that his music is coming back to sort of coming to the forefront for the first time. We did Stay On It with the Rhodes Orchestra a couple years ago, and people really loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fun one. Thanks. Great piece.
Any other questions? Thanks, Evan.
Well, it's been an honor being with you this week. Thanks so much again for everyone who was involved in this commission and this project. It's been a huge honor to be in this list of composers who this legacy that was created by Professor Young. So thank you so much for having me this week.
Thank you, Evan.